That is always a banger. That intro gets me every time. Welcome to Gridiron Lines. This is your host, Gary McKenzie, coming back to you with another episode. And here we are with RGR football. So today's a special bye week episode. You're going to get some history, you're going to get some data, and you're going to get some projections from myself, sort of. All in all, I'm really excited to share this video with you. It's going to be off the beaten path from what we're used to doing, and we're going to focus on the Chiefs' chances of winning the Super Bowl based on what other teams have done in the past. So, before we get started, we'll jump into the fan shout out just like we always do. And today's fan shout out goes to Roger Hamilton. And Roger says, keep in mind that the Chiefs have played a very tough schedule through the first 7 games. I agree with you, Roger, 100%. Thank you for your comment. Before the season started, I keyed off on the first 8 games of the season being super important for the Chiefs' success. I said if they can get to 6-2, they have a very strong chance of getting the number one seed in the AFC, or at least being in a spot to potentially take that number one seed. Obviously, they're a game behind the Bills, technically two because the Bills own the tiebreaker. But if they're able to beat the Titans next week, they'll be 6-2. They'll be in a great position, and the stretch down the rest of the season, the Chiefs, there's a lot of winnable games in the half of the season after the bye. So next week's game versus the Titans is going to be a huge one, and it hasn't gotten a lot of bravado from the media punditry so far, but I think it's a massive game in terms of playoff implications, playoff seeding. The Chiefs really need to win that game, and it's a good thing Coach Reed is so good after the bye. Maybe it'll help the Chiefs do a little better than they did last year. Titans really held Mahomes to his worst offensive output of his career. But let's get into what our video is about today. Let's get to the meat and taters. So we're going to be doing analysis of Super Bowl winners in the last 23, 22 years, somewhere around there. And I believe that the NFL has ran in cycles, and there are different periods or different cycles that have kind of exposed themselves in the NFL over its history. In this current era that the Chiefs are in, it started in 1999, and it began with the greatest show on turf, Kurt Warner and the Rams, and it entered what I call the modern passing era in the NFL. You went from a shift in the 80s and 90s where defensive teams with good running games were winning the lion's share of Super Bowls. So you had teams like the Dallas Cowboys with Emmitt Smith, the Broncos with Terrell Davis. Remember, the Broncos couldn't win a Super Bowl early on in Elway's career. They had some chances, but they ended up doing it once Terrell Davis came into the fold. They also had a very good defense. And there's tons of strong defensive teams with good running games that won the Super Bowl in the 80s and the 90s. Then in 1999, along comes Kurt Warner and the greatest show on turf, one of the greatest stories in NFL history, in my opinion. Kurt Warner is probably one of my favorite NFL players of all time just because of his character. He is a wonderful human being, and you can see that not only by his actions, but just by his play on the field, how he treats others, just an incredible human being. But in 1999, that started the new era that we're currently in, and it's the modern passing era. So during that time frame, it became obvious that if you wanted to win a Super Bowl or have your best chance, you needed a good quarterback with a good offense to try and make it the distance. Some would argue, actually, I would argue that we might be entering a new cycle in the NFL due to Patrick Mahomes' emergence in 2018. And I would describe that era as the hyper passing era. So we're kind of on a cut. We might be on a cusp here, but it's going to take several years before we can see whether or not that plays out. But I went and did an analysis of all the Super Bowl winning teams in the modern passing era since 1999. And I came up with some interesting facts. So I grouped them into 4 buckets initially. The 4 buckets were: did that Super Bowl winning team have a top 10 offense and a top 10 defense in terms of points per game scored and points per game allowed? That was one bucket. The second bucket was, did the team have a top 10 scoring offense only? The next bucket was, did the team have a top 10 scoring defense only? So they didn't have a top 10 scoring offense. Or the last bucket, the team had neither. So if you're looking at this table here, you notice that one of these blocks is a lot heavier than the other. Of these 23 teams, 12 of them had both a top 10 offense and a top 10 defense. So I've been harping for the last several weeks that the Chiefs defense has to improve. This is why right here. It's because the majority of teams that have won the Super Bowl in the passing era, the modern passing era of the NFL, they had a top 10 offense and a top 10 defense. If you end up putting all the weight on Mahomes' shoulders and the offense's shoulders, those teams haven't had as much success. Now, I will say that there's only one Patrick Mahomes, and if there is anyone who can overcome that with any regularity, it would be him. But the Chiefs aren't playing their best averages or their best percentages to go all the way if the defense doesn't improve. I grouped them into 4 more buckets just for fun, and this isn't necessarily statistically driven. It's a little more kind of using words, grouping them that way. But I grouped them into 4 more. The first group was, did the team have a Hall of Fame quarterback plus a good defense? The next one was, the team had a legendary defense, so think the 2000 Ravens. The next one was, the offense carried the team while the defense was kicking and screaming, so they pulled the defense behind them. And then the last group that I had was categorized as any given Sunday. So Nick Foles' run in 2017 with the Eagles is definitely an any given Sunday type Super Bowl run. The 2007 Giants are another one, playing one of the most amazing Super Bowls of all time with the helmet catch. So if you look at these lists again, you'll notice a repeating pattern. 14 of these 23 teams had a Hall of Fame quarterback with a good defense. Only 2 of them, the offense carried the team. The 2006 Colts with Peyton Manning and the 2009 Saints with Drew Brees. So just looking at this, if I'm being honest, the Chiefs going into the playoffs with their defense currently playing the way it is and how it's done so far in this season, they fall into that offense carried the team bucket. And like I said, there's only one Patrick Mahomes, and if anyone could do it, it would be him. But just looking at the facts and the history, the Chiefs, without a better defense, are not in the best position to win the Super Bowl. They're really working against their best interest unless the defense improves. And this is where I want to see sometime in the season, after the bye week especially, the Chiefs defense needs to stand up and say, what are we going to be? Are we going to be the group that causes this team to miss golden opportunity? Or are we going to get better? And are we going to give the Chiefs the best opportunity to go all the way? And that's what the defense needs to do. They need to look in the mirror. So I also grouped these into a scatter plot. And looking at this, you can see the total points allowed ranking for each team with the total points scored ranking for each team. So you can see this graph, and it's not the easiest to visualize, but if you add a line here to separate the groups, you get a stark contrast. So this graph kind of reminds me of dust particles settling on the bottom of the ocean. If you look at the data points, the vast majority of them have a top 10 defense. There are a handful that had worse than the top 10 defense, but the vast majority of Super Bowl winners in the passing era of the NFL had a top 10 defense. If you think about it, Tom Brady, everyone wants to talk about how great Tom Brady is. No one talks about the fact that every single year he won a Super Bowl, he had a top 10 defense. Every year. So if you want Mahomes to put up dynastic numbers like Tom Brady, win a whole bunch of Super Bowls, you pair him with a good defense. They don't have to be a legendary elite defense. They just have to be top 10. If you do that, Mahomes will be in the conversation winning a Super Bowl every year. So right now, the defense is holding this team back. And the question that we have to ask ourselves is, can they improve? Will they improve? Right now, the Chiefs defense ranks 25th in the NFL, giving up 24.6 points per game. That's not good enough. That's 25th. There are only 6 or 7 teams that are better than them this year in terms of not allowing points. And so one thing we always hear about Spagnuolo's defenses is that they improve throughout the season. And I've heard that mentioned, several times. but I never really crunched the numbers to see if that was factually true. So I did just that. And here you see a graph of rolling averages of the Spagnuolo Chiefs defenses starting in 2019. So every season he's been the DC for the Chiefs, all the way to 2022, this season. So if you look at the 2019 season, the blue line, the Chiefs started off the season giving up a little over 25 points per game. Then they had a bit of a rocky go at it here, a lot of swings up and down. And then by about week 10 in the season, you see a continuous drop in their rolling average of points per game allowed. So that one checks the criteria. The defense did get better as the season went on. Looking at 2020, they had a bit of a rocky start, get to about midway through the season, and the defense levels off. In fact, they get a tiny bit worse as the season goes on. So that one doesn't check out. Then 2021, that's where you see your major drop off. So last season, Spagnuolo's defense, they started off the season giving up over 30 points per game. And then around week 6, 7, or 8, that rolling average of points per game allowed just plummeted. And they ended the season being just above 20 points per game. If you look at Steve Spagnuolo's defenses since he's been with the Chiefs, in 2019 they gave up less than 20 points. In 2020, they gave up about 22 and a half points per game. In 2021, they gave up about 21 points per game. So his defenses have been fairly good at limiting points in his first full 3 seasons with Kansas City. In 2022, you see a problem. It's continuing to rise up, and we're in week 9 next week. And so the Chiefs currently are giving up just a shade under 25 points per game. What you want to see is the Chiefs defense to do like they did in 2019 and 2021 and continually drop starting next week versus the Titans. Here you can see the trend lines, and it just emphasizes what I said. In 2021, you can see a very stark drop. If you saw this level of drop in the Chiefs defense this year, they'd have the best defense that they've had in the Patrick Mahomes era. Right now, the best defense they had was in 2019. And what do you know? They won the Super Bowl that year. So the only year, like we said, that they had an upward trajectory was in 2020 and a full season. And then in 2022, they're also having an upward trajectory, and it's time for that to start dipping down. So if someone asks me, okay, do Steve Spagnuolo's defenses actually improve in terms of points per game as the year goes on? My answer to that is, yeah, that looks to be the case in Kansas City. In 2020, when the defense didn't, drop at the end of the season, they still held firm towards the end of the year. So all in all, I'm going to say 2022, it's very likely. I think it's likely that the Chiefs defense, their rolling average in terms of points per game allowed, will continue to drop. Do I think it'll drop low enough to get them into the top 10? That's a stretch. They'd really have to do some work to get there. I think it's possible, but more realistically, we'd be looking at probably the 13th, 14th, or 15th best defense in the NFL. I think that's good enough to give the Chiefs a good shot. So, looking at the rest of the Chiefs' opponents this year to see how that'll shake out and whether or not it's viable that their schedule will be friendly to them in their goal of dropping their points per game allowed. The average offensive ranked team that they'll face down the stretch after the bye is 18.4. So that's a below average offensive slate of opponents. Next week, they have the Titans. They've scored 19 points per game. That ranks 21st. The Jaguars have scored 22 points per game. The Chargers are 23. Rams are 17. They've only scored 17.3 per game, and they rank 29th in the NFL. After that, they have the Bengals. That's going to be a good test. They rank 8th currently, if I could talk. And then they have the Broncos twice, who are dead last. So those are games where you want to see them completely shut down the Broncos offense, limit them from being able to do much of anything, and really drop that points per game average quite a bit. They have the Texans after that. They've only scored 17.7 points per game. And then 2 of their last 3 weeks are versus very good opponents. That's going to be your calibration to see how the defense tests out versus good offensive opponents after they've had some time to get that points per game average down after a pretty friendly stretch for the previous, 7 weeks. So the way I want to see this season play out is after the bye, I want to see them continue to lower that points per game average and then get to the last 3 weeks of the season with the Seahawks and the Raiders and do a test. See where they stand. See if they can limit the Seahawks to fewer points than they normally score. See if they can limit the Raiders to fewer points than they normally score. I'm really hopeful that the defense can do this, but they've got a lot of work ahead of them. And that brings me to my next question, though. If you were an opposing offense, how would you attack this Chiefs defense? So, looking at some X's and O's here, you can see the Chiefs' starting defensive lineup as it'll be for the majority of the last half of the season after the bye. Now, we can scratch off Fenton. I wrote this before he had been traded for a 7th-round pick. But that goes to show you, that trade goes to show you that the Chiefs must have some confidence in Joshua Williams and Jalen Watson to step in. So that's a good sign of confidence for those two. So how would you attack these players on defense for the Chiefs? I think that one thing that's interesting to note regarding just defensive play in the NFL, you can have a very good defense. You can have a top 10 defense in the NFL without any elite players on the defensive side of the ball. What that means or what that needs, though, is that you can't have any weaknesses. So there have been phenomenal defenses. One of the greatest defenses of all time was the no-name defense. Go back to a lot of Belichick's teams. He did have some very good players, but the key thing about Belichick's defenses over the years when they were winning all those Super Bowls with Brady, they didn't have any weak spots on the defense. So there's two ways that offensive coordinators try to beat NFL defenses. One of them is schematically. So they can try to put players in impossible situations, make them make decisions that'll end up hurting them, and do a bunch of other things schematically. Another one is just beating a guy man to man, exploiting a weakness, going after and attacking an individual. The thing about offensive coordinators in the NFL is that the Chiefs are extremely spoiled with having Andy Reid. So he is a schematic genius. He can exploit teams regardless of the level of talent that they have on the defensive side of the ball. But I've got news for you. Not every team can do that. Not every offensive coordinator can do that. Not every team is capable of doing that schematically. It takes a brilliant mind, a brilliant game plan to consistently do that game in and game out. And Coach Reid is one of a handful of coaches that can do that. So that's half of that equation kind of solved. The Chiefs schematically might not have to face a lot of difficult teams during the second half of the season after the bye who can exploit them that way. So that kind of makes you wonder if, offenses are going to be more or less trying to focus on who they can beat from a personnel standpoint. And I think these 4 players or 4 positions are areas where the Chiefs have to have some concern. So Frank Clark's one of those players. Derek Notty's one of those players. George Karlaftis is one of those players. And then the rookie corner duo is one of those players. Whoever's starting out there or playing out there on the other boundary opposite McDuffie, you have Williams and Watson. So the way that I think offensive coordinators will try to beat this is try to get Williams or Watson to have to cover their man for more than 3 seconds if they're playing man defense. I don't care who you are in the NFL. I don't care what cornerback you are. If you have to guard somebody for more than 3 seconds, that's a difficult task. And they're going to double team Chris Jones and then try to win one-on-ones blocking against Clark, Noddy, and Karlaftis. So that's what teams are going to one of the things teams are going to try to do to beat this Chiefs defense going down the stretch. Another thing they're going to try to do is they're going to try to test McDuffie. So they don't know 100% what he's got. They don't know how his hamstring injury has come along. And then they also aren't 100% certain on how sure of a tackler he is out there. So I'd expect to see a lot of bubble screens out towards his direction to see if he can shed a block or if he gets eaten up and the decent gains given up. What teams are not going to want to do is they're not going to want to try to throw the ball over in Snead's direction in a screen type situation because he's a phenomenal tackler and he's phenomenal at getting past blocks. So they're going to try to shade away from that. And these are just a few ways that you can attack this Chiefs defense. The best thing that could possibly happen to the Chiefs, there's 2 things. The 2 best things that can possibly happen to the Chiefs down the stretch defensively, one of them, and this one I think will happen, McDuffie plays lights out. I think McDuffie, just from his college tape, his college numbers, is a very good cornerback. And I think that's going to transition to the NFL. If he's able to do that, that fraction of time that the quarterback has to take by skipping that read or just cutting off that half of the field is going to end up being more pass rush opportunities for guys like Frank Clark, George Karlaftis, Carlos Dunlap, Mike Dana, and Chris Jones. So you could see a cascading effect where McDuffie comes in and all of a sudden the defensive line starts looking better. It's because the quarterback is having more pressure, having to hold on to the ball. In addition to that, I also think Karlaftis' play has been up and down so far this season, but the Chiefs have been using him in many different spots. And he's been rotating to the interior while also going on the outside. Jones has been flipping on the outside very occasionally. I want to take a moment to appreciate the work that Steve Spagnuolo has done this season. The Chiefs are in the top 10 in total sacks with 19, and they haven't had great play from their edge rushers. He's been able to manufacture pressure by dialing up blitzes, exotic blitzes, putting Jones on the edge occasionally, just the perfect amount. I think they've got that formula figured out. And so he's taken a weakness for the Chiefs and turned it into somewhat of a strength. So that's very impressive. But having McDuffie back might force the quarterback to have to hold on to the ball a little bit longer, and then we'll see what happens. If the Chiefs can get away without having to continually blitz to get after the quarterback, that'll make their coverage a little better. If you look at their stats against quarterbacks so far this season, they've given up one of the highest passer ratings. They've also faced a lot of good quarterbacks, so that plays into the equation a bit. But overall, I think that with McDuffie coming back, you might have a little more time to sack the quarterback, and you'll also see Williams and Watson continuously improve, along with Karlaftis. So all these rookies are going to get better, and they should, because practice makes perfect. The more experience they get in a game, the more they're going to learn. So I think that the Chiefs defense, when McDuffie comes back, is going to look quite a bit different in a good way. Their pass defense is going to look better, and their pass rush is also going to look better. So I'm predicting that the Chiefs defense is going to improve after the bye. It might take them a couple weeks, but I think they're going to get there. With that, I also want to make one last note, is that if you were to attack this Chiefs defense another way, you could try to run the ball right at Clark or Karlaftis or Noddy. I'd expect the Titans to try to run behind the tackle quite a bit, either tackle, right tackle or left tackle in this game, to see if Dunlap, Karlaftis, or Dana can stop that attack. So that's going to fall on Willie Gay and Nick Bolton to clean up the mess. And I've got a lot of faith in Bolton in this game. He's been kind of quiet. And I think the reason for that is because offensive coordinators or opposing offenses saw how he played last year. And so now they've got a hat on him. They know to look out for him. They know to send an extra blocker his way if they need it, or just put that little extra bit of emphasis to their offensive players and say, hey, this guy can beat us. And so we need to be paying attention to him. We'll see how he does versus the Titans. With that, though, that's the last bit I want to say. And the key takeaways of this video that I want to share with you is that the Chiefs defense has to improve down the stretch to give them the best chance of going all the way and winning the Super Bowl. They need to be in that top 10 range. If they can't do it, a lot of the chances for the Chiefs winning Super Bowl fall on Mahomes' shoulders. I think he's capable of carrying the team by himself if he has to. He's done it before. But you don't want to go to that well over and over again. So I also think the Chiefs defense will improve. And by week 17 in the season, prior to the playoffs, you want to hope that they're playing their best football defensively of the whole year. Dan did a good job of getting all of Karlaftis' snaps versus several teams. So make sure you go and watch those here at RGR Football because they're pretty good. I use that to garner some opinions of my own. And he posted them without any commentary, which I really appreciated because it gives us a chance to really think about what we think. And oftentimes it's easy just to listen and have people tell us what to think. But sometimes it's good to do that on your own and figure it out on your own. And then you can share with other people and bounce ideas back and forth. So really awesome work by Dan on those. Make sure you go check those out. Also, make sure you like and subscribe because it really helps the algorithm. Share this content with other Chiefs fans. RGR Football has been doing great lately. I'm so blessed to be a part of it, and I really want to thank you all for just taking the time. Don't forget about those videos of Carl Loftus. Make sure you watch them. With that, this is Gary, signing out.
Thanks for watching this video from the team at RGR Football. Click these videos to see more, and subscribe to RGR Football.